Bank employee discriminates against black girl. Trying to deposit money, shocked by her CEO mother. A 15-year-old black girl just wanted to deposit her scholarship money into a bank account. But in the eyes of the bank, she was a threat that needed surveillance. What was the real issue? Her skin color? Or was her independence simply too hard to believe? It was an early Monday morning. The sky was blue, and the air felt light, as if something new and promising was about to unfold. Chrysanta Ava, 15 years old, stepped out of the red brick house in Lincoln Hill, a middle-class neighborhood in the northern part of the city, with confident eyes that couldn't quite hide her nervousness. She wore her school uniform, a navy blazer, pleated skirt, and slightly scuffed loafers. In her hand was a large envelope holding a $7,000 scholarship check, a well-earned reward after nearly a year of tireless academic effort at Trinity Academy, the prestigious school where students had to beat 28-to-1 odds to win a scholarship. It wasn't her first time holding a large check, but it was her first time depositing one on her own. No mother, no advisor, no letter of reference. Just a 15-year-old girl with absolute belief that the world out there would recognize the maturity she was striving to show. Ivy Ava, Chrysanta's mother, is the CEO of Ava Holdings, one of the city's leading financial consulting firms. She never pampered her daughter with wealth. Instead, Ivy taught her independence, the value of hard work, and how to walk into spaces where others might doubt she belongs. Before Chrysanta left the house, Ivy said only one thing. "Don't just deposit the check, sweetheart. Deposit your belief that you deserve respect." And so Chrysanta stepped into Oak Bank, the flagship branch located in the heart of the city's financial district, where tailored suits step out of Mercedes-Benzes, polished leather shoes echo across marble floors, and handshakes always come with six-figure deals. What she didn't know was that the place she thought would process her transaction in minutes would become a brutal test of her dignity, her race, and the pride she carried. Because sometimes, to be seen as a legitimate depositor, it's not documents you need, but the strength to prove your worth to a system that decided who you were before you ever walked through the revolving door. And Chrysanta's battle began, not with her bank account, but with the invisible prejudice waiting for her the moment she stepped inside. An intense, gripping story is unfolding. To continue this story, hit like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming powerful and dramatic episodes. As soon as she stepped up to counter number 4, Chrysanta smiled politely, pulled out the envelope containing her scholarship documents, and presented the $7,000 check. She had prepared everything: a confirmation letter from Trinity Academy, her student ID, and an academic transcript signed by the school. She thought the transaction would be as simple as the basic finance lessons her mother had once taught her: be transparent, present the facts, and sign your name. But real life doesn't follow textbooks. Carlos, the young teller in a white shirt and gray tie, picked up the check and squinted at it. He didn't smile. He didn't greet her. His eyes lingered longer than necessary on the line. Pay to the order of Chrysanta Ava. His left hand held up a verification light, while his right flipped over the check, examining it as though searching for some hidden flaw. "Where did you get this money from?" he asked, hesitant but unmistakably skeptical. "It's my scholarship. I have a confirmation letter from the school," Chrysanta replied, calmly, though she could feel the blood rushing to her face. Before she could explain further, a figure appeared behind Carlos. Alba Thomas, the branch manager, a middle-aged woman in a jet-black suit with eyeliner sharp as a razor, approached without warning. She placed her Rolex-wearing hand on the edge of the counter, her gaze sweeping from Chrysanta's neatly tied hair down to her worn loafers. $7,000 for a high school student? Where'd that money come from? Without waiting for a response, Alba snatched the stack of documents from Carlos's hands. She flipped through each page, frowning. Meanwhile, the echo of her heels rang through the lobby. Nearby customers started turning around, whispering. An elderly woman tugged at her friend's sleeve. What's a girl like that doing, depositing thousands of dollars? Alba lowered her voice, not quite a shout, but loud enough for 5 tables nearby to hear clearly. We've had a few fake scholarship scams lately. Someone even forged private school acceptance letters. We need to verify this thoroughly. Chrysanta stood still, her lips pressed into a firm line. She knew her mother would say, "Don't lose your calm just because others have lost their reason." But it was hard to stay calm when you're being treated like a fraud, even when you have every document to prove otherwise. Carlos turned to her, his voice a bit softer. "We'll need the young lady to step aside while we verify. Sorry, but this area needs to remain open for other customers." Chrysanta was not offered a seat. No chair, no water, no thank you. She stepped aside near the window, where there was sunlight, but no acknowledgement. Everyone who passed by glanced at the check in her hand, as though it were evidence of some possible crime. A younger boy walking with his mother asked, "Why is that girl standing alone, Mom?" The answer, though unspoken, was written in the adult's demeanor, in the way people believed that a black girl, in uniform, holding $7,000, was inherently suspicious. Chrysanta looked around. She saw a white elderly woman being invited into a private office with chilled water and a copy of the Wall Street Journal. She saw an Asian man turned away with an apology about system maintenance, but the staff's eyes weren't as cold when looking at him. At that moment, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. There will be a day you walk into a room where people have already decided you don't belong. But you still walk in because you do belong. Chrysanta took from her backpack a brown leather notebook, a birthday gift from her mother last year, and began to write. No one noticed. But what she wrote, word by word, was history they never expected would be documented. An unofficial report on how a 15-year-old child was treated with suspicion for a maturity that should have been celebrated. And she was still standing there. No seat, no apology, only waiting, and eyes that watched her as if she weren't a customer, but a case file needing extra scrutiny compared to those who look trustworthy. Sometimes, injustice doesn't need to be screamed. It only needs silence. A kind of silence built into a wall, invisible, yet thick enough to make a 15-year-old girl like Chrysanta Ava feel pushed to the margins of society, even though she had only just stepped into the bank less than half an hour ago. She stood in a corner of the lobby. No seat, no signage, and absolutely no kind words from anyone. Just 10 steps away, a white woman in her 60s walked in. She carried only an envelope and a purse. Within 2 minutes, a staff member emerged with a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Kennedy. Beautiful day, isn't it? Please, step into the VIP lounge. I'll bring you some chilled water right away." Chrysanta heard it, and something deep in her chest stirred. She didn't need chilled water. She didn't need compliments. But she needed to be acknowledged as a person, not a suspicious file under observation. Just minutes later, a tan-skinned man, possibly Middle Eastern or North African, stepped up to the counter. He spoke fluent English, but Alba merely glanced at him and said, "Your documents are incomplete. Sorry, the system is being upgraded. Please return tomorrow afternoon." No further questions. No careful checks. No suggestions or guidance. Chrysanta didn't know who he was, but his eyes, as he left, held a quiet shame. And once again, she witnessed discrimination, not through insults, but through decisions made with glances and the speed of service. She opened her bag and pulled out a brown leather notebook, its cover embossed in gold with her name. Chrysanta Alva, to think is to write. A quote from her mother. If no one believes you, write to protect yourself. And she began to write. 10:13 a.m. Teller. Carlos retained the check and documents. 10:17. Asked to stand in a separate area. No clear explanation. 10:26. Mrs. Kennedy was escorted to the VIP lounge. No documents required. 10:34. Tan-skinned man rejected immediately after presenting papers. 10:39. Security guard walked by, looked at me twice, said nothing. She didn't know what these notes would be used for, but she knew silence was a trap, and recording was the way out. Chrysanta glanced at Carlos. He was on his phone, possibly texting. Alba was chatting with a suited male client who appeared to be a business owner. No one noticed her. No one asked if she was thirsty, tired, or needed assistance. She remained a foreign object in that gleaming space, the only dark dot on the marble floor. And then, a small moment revealed something deeper. All eyes were trained not to see her. A white boy, about 8 years old, ran past and nearly bumped into her. He turned, about to apologize, but his mother grabbed his hand and whispered, "Don't go near her," as if she were dangerous. Chrysanta took a deep breath. She didn't cry, she didn't panic, but something inside her cracked. She wrote another line in her notebook. 11:02. The feeling of standing in a crowded room, but being completely invisible. The feeling of being judged without committing a crime. The feeling of being taught that silence is politeness, when in truth, it's the weapon of those in control. At 15, Chrysanta Ava had no lawyer, no power, no media behind her. But she had observation, a pen, and the belief that, as long as I don't step back, the invisible walls will eventually collapse. Time no longer passed the way it used to. For Chrysanta Ava, each minute inside the oaked bank lobby felt like a psychological endurance test, where no one needed to handcuff you to make you feel imprisoned. She had stood there for nearly an hour, one hand clutching her leather notebook, her eyes scanning the room for an opportunity, or, at the very least, a trace of justice. 11:11 a.m. She took a deep breath, stepped toward the counter, and spoke softly but clearly. "Excuse me. I left my phone at school. May I borrow a phone to call my mom? She's expecting me back." Carlos didn't respond. He looked up and glanced toward the manager's office. And then, as if her simple request were a violation of bank protocol, Alba Thomas emerged, heels striking the marble floor with sharp, angry rhythm. She didn't ask why, didn't inquire. She just pointed to the wall clock behind the counter. "Do you see the time? Our business hours do not include lending out phones to customers. If your mother cared, she should have come with you." That last line wasn't a statement. It was an accusation. Chrysanta said nothing. She simply took a step back and returned to the corner of the room. Her small shoulders seemed to retreat into themselves in that cold, impersonal space. But Alba wasn't done. She signaled the security guard, a tall man in a black uniform standing near the entrance, and said loud enough for nearby customers to hear, "Keep an eye on the girl. Make sure she doesn't wander off or leave the lobby until verification is complete." From scholarship recipient, the 15-year-old girl was now labeled a person of interest. The corner where Chrysanta stood had no cameras, no informational signage, and certainly no assistance. She seemed to vanish from the service system, as if she were no longer part of the customer database. A couple had just arrived, holding hands, designer clothes. The woman wore Gucci heels, carried a Hermes purse. Bank staff bowed to them like they were patrons of the institution. And Chrysanta? She stood less than 10 meters from the counter, yet somehow didn't exist. Silently, she wrote more lines in her notebook. 11:21. Request to call home denied. 11:22. Security instructed to monitor me. 11:25. No staff has explained the verification process. 11:31. New customers served immediately upon arrival. In Chrysanta's mind, discrimination was no longer an abstract concept. It was as real as the overhead light shining down on her. She hadn't been yelled at. She hadn't been insulted. But every gesture, the glances, the attitude, the deliberate neglect was enough to crush the confidence she'd carried in this morning. A nearby white man leaned toward his friend and whispered, "That girl doesn't look okay. Wonder what's going on." His friend shrugged. "Probably some shoplifting thing. She doesn't look like a scholarship type." Chrysanta heard it all. She was used to being judged for her natural curls, her dark brown skin, the sharpness in her eyes that others mistook for arrogance. She once believed that academic achievement could overcome that. But now, surrounded by the bright white walls of a bank that was supposed to stand for fairness, she understood. Achievement couldn't protect you from prejudice. Not if they've already decided you don't belong. 11:46 a.m. Chrysanta stood still, notebook still in hand. Her eyes wandered along the ceiling, a reflex, perhaps, to avoid looking into the judgmental stares around her. But then, something made her stop. The door to the manager's office cracked open. Out stepped Alba Thomas, alongside a man in a light brown suit, polished leather shoes, and carrying a black Toomey briefcase. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair neatly slicked back. He didn't look like an ordinary customer, and he certainly wasn't there to deposit pocket change. Chrysanta recognized him immediately. Bernard E. Morrison, CEO of Summit Trust Bank, the direct competitor of her mother's firm, Ava Holdings. She'd seen him once on television, during a finance summit where her mother had been a keynote speaker. That face, sharp, cold eyes that never smiled, and a voice always laced with calculation. At the time, her mother had said only one thing: he doesn't compete. He eliminates. And now, here he was, walking into a bank her mother was preparing to invest in. Chrysanta instinctively held her breath. She stepped back slightly, hiding behind a marble column, still watching. Alba opened the briefcase and pulled out a red folder with a clip spine, clearly labeled Confidential, Internal. It wasn't a customer form, wasn't a routine document. It was internal material. Bernard flipped through it right there. After about 30 seconds, he paused on a middle page, nodded slowly, and said something. Too softly to hear. But the subtle smile on his face said everything. Satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction you see only on those who've just acquired something they were never supposed to have. Alba smiled too, a very different smile from the cold expression she'd shown Chrysanta. This smile looked submissive, servile. 11:49, Chrysanta scribbled quickly into her notebook. Bernard Morrison, CEO, Summit Trust, meets directly with Alba Thomas. Internal documents, confidential, not through front desk. No receipt, whispering. No other customer allowed into the management office. A powerful instinct surged inside her. This wasn't just discrimination anymore. She began connecting the dots. Her mother had once said Ava Holdings was finalizing a partnership deal with Oak D Bank, a transaction valued at over $18 million, one that could shift regional market share. If details of that deal were leaked, or if bank staff were colluding with competitors, This wasn't about poor service. It was commercial espionage. She added another note. If Mom finds out, she won't just pull the deal. She'll sue the entire system. But the real question was, who would believe a 15-year-old girl with no photos, no recordings, just a notebook and her own sharp eyes? Chrysanta didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. Silence was no longer an option. She watched as Bernard walked out, shaking Alba's hand. He had no idea he'd left a trace, not on paper, but in the sharp memory of a child he underestimated. She wrote the final line on that page. Maybe I didn't come to this bank just to deposit money today. Maybe I came to uncover a truth the adults tried to hide, and never imagined a kid would see. 1 hour and 16 minutes had passed since Chrysanta stepped into Oaked Bank. The $7,000 scholarship check was still in Carlos's hands, untouched. The scholarship documents, fully signed, stamped, and with original copies, had been handed to Alba. But no one told her when the verification would be complete. No one asked if she was okay. She stood there, back aching, hands chilled from the air conditioning blowing directly from above. Faint red marks appeared on her wrists from carrying her backpack too long. But colder than the room was the indifference. Every glance that brushed past her, every sidestep by an employee, every silent minute, they all sliced into the faith a 15-year-old girl carried with her. And then the final cut came. Alba stepped out of the manager's office, face frozen. No service smile, no professional courtesy left. She looked at Chrysanta like someone looking at a problem to be removed. Take this girl to the surveillance room. We need further assessment before we decide on processing the check. The words sounded like protocol, but there was no hiding the venom beneath them. A security guard immediately approached Chrysanta, gesturing with his hand. Not a word spoken. At that moment, when the distance between customer and suspect under surveillance narrowed to a single step, Chrysanta lifted her head. No more avoiding eyes. No more lips pressed in silence. She looked Alba straight in the eye, voice slightly trembling, but every word sharp and deliberate, as if rehearsed her whole life. I'm not a criminal. I came here to deposit a scholarship I earned through hard work. And I know what you're doing. I saw it all. I know who you met, and what you're hiding. The entire lobby froze. Carlos looked up. A couple signing documents paused mid-sentence. Mrs. Kennedy in the VIP lounge glanced through the glass, raising an eyebrow. Even the guard who had stepped forward halted for a second. Alba looked shaken, but only for a moment. She stepped half a pace closer, eyes narrowing. Is that a threat, little girl? Chrysanta didn't respond. She didn't have to. What she'd said had already cracked the illusion of authority Alba wrapped around herself. But power doesn't topple easily. And a child, no matter how brave, is always the easiest scapegoat in a system built on prejudice. Alba flicked her hand. The guard understood the signal. He didn't handcuff her, but escorted her out like she was being detained. Not forcibly, but just enough to make every watching eye assume Chrysanta had done something wrong. The surveillance room they brought her to was a square box, roughly 6 square meters in size. No windows, no chairs. A single yellow-tinted bulb overhead. No explanation. No posted policy. No written statement. Chrysanta sat on the floor, back against the wall, notebook still in hand. But this time, she didn't write right away. She closed her eyes. And then, her mother appeared in her mind. Ivy Ava, seated at a boardroom table, spotlight hitting the shoulder of her cream blazer. Her mother always said, "You may not be believed, but never let anyone take your voice. Because when you dare to speak, you dare to exist." And so, in a room without a chair, without water, and without trust, a small voice grew strong with the courage of a 15-year-old girl. She knew. The truth she held could cost many people their jobs. But more importantly, she knew. She hadn't let them make her lose herself. 12:22 p.m. The revolving glass door of Oaked Bank made a soft sound as it turned, but the way it spun felt slower, as if the entire space inside were bracing for something, or more precisely, someone, to enter. A woman appeared. Ivy Avenue, about 5 feet 10 inches, with softly curled hair pinned neatly up. She wore a pleated beige trench coat and chocolate brown heels. Her eyes were razor sharp, her demeanor as calm as a still lake. From the moment she stepped inside, the lobby seemed to hold its breath. No introduction needed, no staff to announce her. The entire teller line froze for a few seconds. Carlos dropped his pen. 2 staff members in the VIP signing area paused mid-signature. A customer checking their online banking login instinctively looked up. Ivy walked straight ahead. Not a single misstep. She looked at no one except one person. Alba Thomas. "I'm Ivy Ava, and I have a simple question. Why is my daughter being held in a room like a suspect, when the only thing she came here to do was deposit a scholarship check?" Her voice wasn't raised. It wasn't sharp. But every word carried the weight of lead, crashing directly into the face Alba had used to look down on her daughter. Alba stepped back slightly. Her throat moved, but she couldn't speak. The door to the surveillance room opened behind them. Chrysanta stepped out. Small frame, still wearing her backpack, still holding the worn brown leather notebook. But her gaze no longer lowered. She walked toward her mother, like a warrior emerging from a dungeon, and opened her notebook. Since 10:13 a.m., I was denied service, made to wait with no chair, no explanation. I recorded every timestamp, every denial. From Mrs. Kennedy being taken into the VIP room without document checks, to an Arab client being dismissed outright. Then at 11:46, I saw Ms. Thomas hand over a document marked "Confidential" to Mr. Bernard Morrison, CEO of Summit Trust, your direct competitor. A wave of shock rippled through the lobby. Carlos went pale. Staff near the counter started whispering. Alba forced a smile. But it was crooked, like makeup running after a heavy rain. "This is just a misunderstanding, Ms. Avenue, your daughter. She may have misunderstood. She's too young to—" "No!" Ivy cut in, softly but with a blade. "My daughter may be young, but her memory and integrity are larger than the system you're trying to hide behind." Alba turned to Carlos for help, but Carlos had already backed away to the computer station. No one stood by her anymore. The air grew thick. A young woman near the entrance called out. I saw them ignore the girl while she stood alone for a long time. A middle-aged black man in the waiting line added, "I was behind her." I can confirm, there was no reason to keep her. It was deliberate. The silence shattered. In its place came a stream of honest words from people who had stayed quiet too long. And Ivy? She didn't need to shout. She simply stepped forward, locked eyes with Alba. "You violated professional ethics. You let power and prejudice guide you. And worst of all, you used this facility to leak information to our competitor. I want to speak to the regional director, and I demand your immediate suspension." Alba tried to protest, but before she could speak, the security guard, this time no longer under her command, stepped forward. "Ms. Thomas, please come with me." The atmosphere inside the bank lobby was no longer that of routine transactions. It had become a courtroom without a jury, where every glance, every word, and every action was brought into the light. and standing at the center of the storm was Ivy Ava, mother, woman, and one of the most influential financial advisors in the region. After instructing security to escort Alba out of the transaction area, Ivy didn't stop there. She pulled a phone from her trenchcoat pocket, opened a secure folder, and raised the screen showing a video clip. On it, footage from the bank's internal camera played clearly. Alba Thomas, bowing her head to hand over a folder labeled Confidential to Bernard Morrison, CEO of Summit Trust, right outside the management office. "You called this a misunderstanding?" Ivy said coldly, her eyes never leaving the screen. "You didn't just insult a child with prejudice. You facilitated the leak of strategic documents, ones that could compromise an $18.5 million deal I've been negotiating with the Oak D board for 4 months. Alba, standing in the hallway beside the guard, tried to keep her composure, but her face had turned pale. She responded weakly, I was only sharing client information for consultation. Nothing illegal." Ivy smirked. "What kind of client information needs to be shared with the CEO of a rival bank during business hours, without a receipt, without a recording, and happening precisely while my daughter was being detained for verification?" The silence in the lobby thickened. Bank employees whispered to each other. Carlos, the teller who first handled Crisanta's check, lowered his head, flipping through the same file he'd opened at the beginning of his shift, but couldn't focus on. Another teller discreetly opened their personal laptop and typed, "Subject, urgent, regarding branch manager." Bernard Morrison, the man who had received the documents from Alba, had left the bank 15 minutes earlier, as confirmed by the access log system. No one had stopped him, but the evidence hadn't walked out with him. Ivy stepped toward Carlos, her voice not loud, but echoing into every corner of the lobby. "You were the one who received my daughter's transaction. And while you didn't violate protocol, your silence allowed wrongdoing to continue. In finance, silence is sometimes the most dangerous thing." She turned to the receptionist. "I want this entire exchange recorded in an official report, and I will be submitting all evidence, including footage, witness statements, and my daughter's documentation, to the State Banking Oversight Committee and Oak D's Internal Ethics Council." Some customers began recording video. A middle-aged man in a gray suit, likely a legal representative of the bank, hurried out from a back office. He approached Ivy, extended his hand, and spoke softly. "We sincerely apologize, Ms. Avenue. This incident is more serious than we imagined. I will personally see to the immediate suspension of Alba Thomas and ensure full cooperation with the investigative authorities." Ivy nodded, saying nothing more. Crisanta, who had stood behind her mother the entire time, now stepped forward. She reopened her leather-bound notebook and handed it to the bank's legal representative. "This is the full record. Timestamps, actions, and statements. Minute by minute. Each witness. Every instance of discrimination." He took the notebook, flipped through the first few pages, and nearly froze. "You wrote all of this?" he asked, stunned. Crisanta nodded. "From when I was told to stand, to when I was placed in a room with no chair, no water, and when Ms. Thomas told security to keep an eye on me." She said it calmly, not defiantly, not trembling, but with a quiet strength that made the entire room look inward. The kind of courage that comes from someone who was once treated as invisible. 3 days after the incident at Oak Bank's Midtown branch, the entire banking system was no longer the same. On Thursday morning, the local news broadcast, WN 8 New York, displayed a bold headline. 15-year-old black girl exposes document leak and discrimination plot in the heart of Midtown's financial district. The accompanying photo showed Chrysanta Ava leaving the bank with her mother, Ivy Ava, surrounded by press, still holding the brown leather notebook that had become a symbol. No one could have predicted that a teenage girl would be the one to force an entire banking system to the brink of radical change. Carlos, the teller who initially received Chrysanta's $7,000 scholarship check, wasn't fired, but he was reassigned internally from the Midtown branch to an administrative role at the Bronx location, with no authority to serve customers directly. In Oakwood's internal report, Carlos's behavior was described as no procedural misconduct, but a failure to demonstrate the courage required to uphold justice when signs of discrimination emerge. Alba Thomas, once the powerful figure at the Midtown branch, was officially and permanently dismissed, accompanied by an ethics warning sent to the entire financial sector of New York State. Although she attempted to contest the decision through legal counsel, video surveillance, Chrysanta's meticulous notebook, and testimony from at least 8 customers dismantled every defense. The State Financial Oversight Commission issued a public statement. This is not merely an individual incident. It is the product of an institutional culture built on prejudice and disregard for human dignity. Meanwhile, Liana Rhodes, a young black teller at the branch, who had remained silent when witnessing Chrysanta's isolation, did what many others didn't dare to. She submitted an internal response email, including a detailed incident report and a personal apology addressed to Chrysanta. That act of courage wasn't just acknowledged, it was rewarded. The following week, she was promoted to customer service supervisor, tasked with rebuilding behavioral standards at the branch and ensuring that every customer, regardless of race, age, or appearance, was treated with fairness. But the most sweeping change came from Oakwood Bank's executive board itself. Following a closed-door meeting with Ivy Ava, they agreed to launch an unprecedented initiative in the industry. The no assumption policy, no judging, customers by appearance. Starting next month, all employees across the Oakwood Bank network nationwide will be required to complete a mandatory training course covering unconscious bias recognition, inclusive communication, and customer interaction skills for youth, minorities, and vulnerable clients. A new code of ethics was also issued, requiring every employee to sign before their first shift of the month. I pledge not to let personal judgment, bias, or emotion influence my professional decisions. Chrysanta never wanted to become a symbol, but her story had already extended beyond the boundaries of a single bank branch. High schools across the region invited her to speak about observation skills, note-taking, and standing up for the truth. Young Justice Weekly named her among the 15 teens reshaping social justice in 2025. And Ivy Ava? She simply smiled when asked by the media how she felt about it all. I didn't come to protect my daughter. I came to make it clear. No one has the right to silence the voice of truth, especially when it comes from a 15-year-old girl who knows exactly who she is. The main auditorium of Trinity Academy, with its high ceilings, deep blue velvet curtains, and perfectly aligned rows of seats, was packed. In the front row sat leading professors, representatives of educational organizations, and members of the local press. Behind them were over 500 students from 6th to 12th grade, with eyes full of anticipation, and some still clouded from past injustice. On stage, Chrysanta Ava, 15 years old, wearing her school blazer and pleated skirt, stepped up to the wooden podium under the stage lights. In her hand was a brown leather notebook, worn at the edges from time. an ordinary object. If you didn't know that this very notebook had shaken the New York banking system in just a few hours. Behind her, the screen projected the words, Trinity Student Conference. Theme, justice, freedom, and the choice of silence. Chrysanta stood still for a few seconds, gazing down at the audience. Not a whisper. No one checking phones. Everyone was waiting. And then, with a clear, youthful voice, she began. I used to think that the $7,000 scholarship check was the greatest reward I'd ever earned. I used to think it would be the thing that helped me reach college, something many kids in Lincoln Hill don't easily achieve. But then, on the morning of April 12th, I realized there's a kind of value greater than money. Chrysanta paused. She opened the notebook and held it up to her chest. This is where I wrote down every word, every glance, and every action that took place at Oakdale Bank that day. I didn't shout slogans. I didn't have a camera. I only had this notebook and the determination not to let silence win. When a powerful woman judged me because I was a black girl holding a scholarship check. When the security guard was ordered to keep an eye on me just because I asked to call my mom. When the entire room chose to look away instead of speak up. I knew. If I didn't speak up, no one would. She stepped aside. The screen behind her changed. A newspaper front page appeared with the headline, Oakdale Bank overhauls policy after 15-year-old student's incident. Applause broke out, but Chrysanta didn't pause to bask in praise. That day, my mother didn't show up as a powerful executive. She showed up as someone who taught me that courage isn't about yelling loudly. It's about standing tall when you're all alone. The $7,000 check may help me get to college, but it was that moment I opened my notebook and began to speak that changed the small world around me. This time, the auditorium didn't clap immediately. There were tearful eyes, hands clutched tighter to friends. And then, a 9th grade student stood up, clapping as if they couldn't hold it in anymore. The applause spread in waves. The entire hall stood. A standing ovation that lasted over 90 seconds. 2 weeks later, Chrysanta was invited to speak at the National Youth Conference on Justice and Equality, held in Washington, D.C. She was the youngest individual to deliver a solo keynote, alongside civil rights activists, lawyers, and human rights representatives. Her name appeared on the podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. An elementary school in Newark decided to name its reading room the Chrysanta Ava Room, where no one is silenced. And from that point on, the name Chrysanta Ava was no longer just tied to a scholarship or a notebook. It stood for a generation that doesn't bow to judgment, a generation that refuses silence in the face of injustice. The story of Chrysanta Ava is not only about a young girl confronting injustice. It's a wake-up call for all of us about silence, prejudice, and courage. Are you ready to speak up when you see something wrong? Or will you stand still and let the truth be buried? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that stories of Black strength, intellect, and resilience deserve to be heard, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Black Strength Stories channel.